Any equation you ever see with a rate of change in it as part of the equation or the entirety of the equation is considered to be a differential equation. So we're going to talk a little bit about physics. How many of you are taking physics or have taken physics before? I think all of you have some sort of physics experience? No? No physics?
Well, I was in
Never, you're in denial?
I was in AP for a little bit and then
A little bit?
no.
Okay, so if we know acceleration, what do we need to do to acceleration? What do we do to acceleration to find velocity? What do you do? What do you do to acceleration to find velocity? What's the relationship between the two? Yes, velocity is the antiderivative of acceleration because what is the derivative of velocity? Acceleration. So what are we going to do? We are going to integrate a of t dt. What is a of t dt? It tells us what a of t is. What is a of t? What is that? It tells us it right here. It is negative 32 dt. What is the antiderivative of just negative 32? What is the antiderivative of negative 32 dt? Well, in this case, we're not calling it x. What is it? It's going to be negative 32 what? T, because we said dt, time, right? But what do we have to say at the end? Plus what? Plus what? C. It's okay. Plus c. So right now we now know that velocity in terms of t is the integral of a of t. So we now know that v of t is negative 32t plus c. So we're not done yet because what do we need to find? What have we not solved for? What's the one missing thing we need to solve for? What's that one missing thing we need to solve for? We need c. We need to know what c is in order to write this equation. We need to find c in order to write this equation. What information do we use to find that? It gave us some information in the initial. It gave us the initial velocity. What does it tell us? What did it tell us? Initial velocity of. So the velocity at time. Sorry, the velocity at time 0 is what? 132. So we know v of 0 is 132. So we know 132 is equal to negative 32 times 0 plus c. So what does that make c?
132?
132. So what's our final velocity equation going to be? V of t is going to be negative 32t plus what? 132. What's the relation between position and velocity? What's the relationship between position and velocity? What? The integral. So the s of t, the position, is equal to the integral of v of t dt. So we have the integral of negative 32t plus 132t. Oh, 132 dt. Can someone integrate that for me? What's the integral of that? You can do that for me. Can someone do that? Can someone just tell me if they don't? Plus c. Let's simplify that a little bit. What is that? Negative. So we now know s of t is equal to negative 16t squared plus what? 132t plus what? Plus c. Now this is, how many people have seen negative 16t squared before? Have you seen that in physics before? You see that a lot in physics. Okay, so still, what do we need to solve for again? What's the one thing? You need to solve for the c value, and this time, Nick, what do we use? What does it tell us right here? 48. The top of a 48 tall building. So what does that mean? It means that the position at time 0 is what? The position is 48, exactly. So we know s of 0 is 48. So we know 48 is equal to negative 16 times 0 squared plus 132 times 0 plus c. So what does that mean c equals, Nick? 48. Exactly. So now do we have the position function? Yep. We sure do. It's going to be s of t is equal to negative 16t squared plus 132t plus 48. So now we have the position function. That's nice. So we have three functions now. We have the acceleration, we have the velocity, and we have the position. So let's look at the next question. It says, find the maximum height and when it occurs. So this is what I'd like you to do now. Find a piece of the board, everybody. Find a piece. Now, how long does it take to hit the ground? Don't figure this out. Just answer the question. What's going on when it hits the ground? What's going on with the velocity? What's going on with the position? Theoretically, instantly it goes to 0, right? But right before that, it's going to be really high. But what's the position when it hits the ground? What's the position when it hits the ground? 0, exactly. So for a fact, you're looking for s of 0. So s of t equals 0 when it hits the ground, right? Do you agree with that? So we need to take the position function, which is negative 16t squared plus 132t plus 48, and set it equal to 0. Now what? Don't solve it. Just tell me about it. What type of equation is that? That's a quadratic, right? So theoretically, you might be able to what? You kind of hope it's what? You hope it's factorable. What would you want to do before you start factoring that, though? What could you do first? You could factor out something. What could you factor out? Anybody see what you can factor out?
2 or 4.
Well, factor out.
8.
Can you factor out 16 nicely?
No.
I'm not sure if you can, right? From the 132. So the way I would do it, just so you can see what I would do, factor out the small things first. I don't like the negative, so I'm going to factor out negative 8. Negative 2 would make it 8t squared minus, what is that, 66t minus 24. Can I factor out a 2 again? So what does it become when I factor out a 2 again? Negative 4 times what? 4t squared minus 33t minus 12. Is that correct? And when you look at that, it might be factorable, but you're not sure, right? You're not 100% sure if that's it. Well, to be clear, and I've tried to be careful about this, everything is factorable. It's not necessarily pretty. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's not necessarily pretty. It could be terrible. It could be a radical of some kind. What can we do if, what's that formula that we need to remember how to use? What is it called? Oh, you're not going to say it with me, are you? The quadratic formula. Do you remember what's the thing underneath the radicals called? Do you remember what the thing underneath the radical is called? The discriminant, and that's b squared minus 4ac. So in this case, that's going to be negative 33 squared minus 4 times negative 12. What are you going to be expected to have in order to do this question? Your calculator. Can someone just do that on the calculator for me? Negative 33 squared minus 4 is equal to negative b. What's b in this case? So it's going to be 33 plus or minus the square root of 1281 all over 2 times 4. Because where do you have? Here's a, here's b, and here's c right there. So if you do that on your calculator, how many answers do you get? Find me the 2 answers using your calculator right now, everybody. Nick, please go into tablet mode. So the first thing you can do is write down in terminology what you know. You know that a of t is negative 20 feet per second. Find an equation of the height of the ball thrown upward off of a 100-foot tall building. So if it's thrown off of a 100-foot tall building, what does that tell you? Does that tell you about its acceleration? No. Does that tell you about its velocity? No. What does it tell you about? Its height. Specifically, it tells you the height at what time?
0.
So that means s of 0 is 100 with an initial velocity of 15 feet per second. So what does that tell you right there? V of 0 is what? 15. So starting here, everybody, find me the equation for the height of the ball using these 2 things. Go to the board and do it with somebody else. Just to get this down, you had, well, I'll put it in with the image.